Welcome. This is our third gathering on Evagrius Ponticus's Praktikos. I want to begin a little bit differently this morning. My intention was to reflect a little bit more on his life and work. But one of the things that we talked about yesterday is the shoulders he stands on, how he inherited the gifts that came from both his learning as a young man, but also his time with in the desert and with his spiritual teachers and masters. And yesterday, I received a note, and I believe Robert received it as well. He sent me a note later in the day about it. And I have added a name to my Pomelnik, my necrologue, my book of those who have entered the eternal. June is a very full month for me in this book. I turn the page at the beginning of the month to what is on the new month, June in this case. This is a tradition in the Christian East. Other people practice it in various ways, where we remember all those that have gone before us. And June, I have some of my ancestors there. My beloved father, the 22nd of June, 1969, entered the eternal. Martin Buber, who I hold dear in my heart, entered the eternal on the 13th, 1965. I remember it vividly. In Chicago, I was in a swimming pool in the suburbs of Chicago, and the Midnight Special, a program on on WFMT in Chicago, was interrupted with the announcement that Martin Buber had entered the eternal. I have a niece of mine who died way too young, 2 years ago. And now I've added Robert Coles. Robert Coles is important for us here in many ways. He died on the 4th of this month. He was a doctor, a child psychologist, a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst, a literature professor, documentarian, and wrote many books. I read him periodically over the years. He wrote about Simone Weil, Dorothy Day, various poets who were also doctors. And he also wrote this book, The Call of Service. What had so moved me was to read how in the height of the endeavor to integrate schools in the United States, he went with his tape recorder to New Orleans and sat in the home of several of the young Black children who had been selected sort of by the community to integrate the McDonough School in New Orleans. And he sat and recorded conversations. He wanted to be present. He cared deeply about this issue. He wanted to be present to how this was unfolding. His training in psychology had not prepared him in any way, he said, for what unfolded. For what unfolded was how he became the student of a little girl who was the one to integrate the McDonough School in grade 1. to be met by the federal marshals and walk to that school through a crowd of jeering white people. Her name was Tessie, and her grandmother was Martha, deeply rooted in the church, the black church there. And there's one incident in a morning where Tessie said she was sick and didn't feel like she could go. Coles writes about this, or a lot of it is from his recording in this book, The Call of Service. And the grandmother who'd prepared her lunch said to her, "Oh, Tessie, my darling, I understand this is hard. If you are really sick, that is okay. But if, my darling, you have to understand, my darling, God has given you a work to do, not for yourself, but for all those people that are standing out there screaming at you. He's called you to do a work, to heal New Orleans." It's an amazing account and touched Coles very deeply and led him to, in many ways, rethink what it means to be in the presence of other human beings, young or old, in the midst of struggles. It also shows in such a poignant way the gifts of drawing on the shoulders of those we stand on. For Grandmother Martha, it was the scriptures that fed her in those moments and gave her a word to speak to her beautiful granddaughter. So Robert Coles, who left this world a few days ago, he left a body of work. His concern, as he said often, was to learn how to listen deeply without presumption in order to understand what was actually going on in the life of other human beings. So I remember him as one of those now great cloud of witnesses who has taught us yet again what Evagrius is also teaching us and what this whole spiritual tradition is about. So today, we will begin by spending some time with the section titled Against the 8 Evil Thoughts. So Evagrius turns now in this work from his description of how these thoughts have their way to the struggle with these 8 passionate thoughts. Such thoughts arise quite easily, it seems, out of the gifts of the human soul, gifts bestowed upon us in our being, given by God for fellowship and enjoyment, living in and through communion with God's world. How to be restored, how to be present now, as the shepherds proclaimed. in Auden's lovely Christmas oratorio. How to be present now is the reason I follow this star. So our first chapter is 15, and I'll ask Jacqueline to read it for us, and I'll make a few remarks, and then perhaps you can read it again. Jacqueline, thank you.
Readings, vigils, and prayer. These are the things that lend stability to the wandering mind. Hunger, toil, and solitude are the means of extinguishing the flames of desire. Turbid anger is calmed by the singing of psalms, by patience and almsgiving. But all these practices are to be engaged in according to due measure and at the appropriate times. What is untimely done, or done without measure, endures but a short time, and what is short-lived is more harmful than profitable.
Monastic practice, indeed, it seems to me, the life of Christian discipline, endeavors to establish an alternate rhythm to the rhythm of the world. It is characterized by the somber play of gratitude and praise, attentiveness to the ways of distraction below consciousness, and glimpses of restoration and moments of glory. The whole liturgy is a kind of drama of that for us every time we are present to it. To counter the colonizing captivity of the wandering mind, the authority of monastic tradition with its cycle of prayer and fasting, work and contemplation, endeavor to shift the inner life of these hard cases in monasteries. Evagrius warns about the danger of becoming spiritually inflated with the rhythm and its discipline, insisting that what is called for us to attend to the rhythm of the tradition in community. When a monastic takes a practice to extreme on his or her own account, this is part of his discussion about the solitaries versus the cenobites. The natural authority that dwells in the community is usurped. And it's likely a pathway to stepping outside what is given and will be short-lived and harmful. Spiritual romanticism is a monastic temptation, not peculiar to them, but common. Since monasteries are for the hard cases, various forms of spiritual romanticism often arise. It takes time. This is so important. It takes time, years often, for the cycle of prayer to take hold as an occasion of joy and attention. On one side is the temptation to obey the formal requirement and be fixated on it. On the other side is the temptation to play fast and loose with the requirements. Listen again to chapter 15.
Readings, vigils, and prayer. These are the things that lend stability to the wandering mind. Hunger, toil, and solitude are the means of extinguishing the flames of desire. Turbid anger is calmed by the singing of psalms, by patience and almsgiving. But all these practices are to be engaged in according to due measure and at the appropriate times. What is untimely done, or done without measure, endures but a short time, and what is short-lived is more harmful than profitable.
Chapter 16. Ted, would you read that for us? Read it. I will make a few remarks and then read it again.
Good. When the soul desires to seek after a variety of foods, then it is time to afflict it with bread and water, that it may learn to be grateful for a mere morsel of bread. For satiety desires a variety of dishes, but hunger thinks itself happy to get its fill of nothing more than bread.
The danger of satisfaction, oddly, leads to assuming there is more to be had. It is as if the soul needs to be attentive to what is not yet. The state of hunger is the opposite of satisfaction, oriented towards and open to what is arising, not because of one's will, but as a disposition towards what is offered in grace, coming to greet one unbidden. This is kenotic, a kenotic condition, where emptiness makes a place for what is arising. Not a space, but a place. There's a difference. Kenosis, emptying, is central to our creaturehood, for it tempers all our assumptions and disposes us toward the presence of the kingdom, the arising of grace in all that addresses us. In theology, kenosis refers to the self-emptying of Jesus Christ in the Incarnation. We read of this in the letter to the Philippians. This is part and parcel of the revelation. But because it's part and parcel of the revelation, it is about us as well. We are also called to empty our soul of all habits, all images, all assumptions, which frame our self-understanding as needing to be someone or needing something, as we witness in the revelation of the temptation in the garden, and as revealed in Christ's temptation in the desert, and as we may have noticed in our own encounters with temptation. The temptation in the desert, the first one, stones into bread. The second one, testing God. The third one, power and authority. The opposite of the disposition of needing something is kenosis, the landscape in which presence arises. Cast your mind back to Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor. cast your mind back to that. In that extraordinary narrative, Jesus Christ says not one word. He is simply present to a figure that is completely full of presumption. Limiting one's intake of water helps a great deal to obtain temperance. This isn't a dietary issue. It's a symbolic one. This was well understood by the 300 Israelites accompanying Gideon just when they were preparing to attack the Midians. Read this in Judges 7 for this account and its spiritual meaning while struggling with the temptation of pride at conquest. Ted, would you read it again?
When the soul desires to seek after a variety of foods, then it is time to afflict it with bread and water, that it may learn to be grateful for a mere morsel of bread. For satiety desires a variety of dishes, but hunger thinks itself happy to get its fill of nothing more than bread.
Melody, would you read chapter 18? Again, read it. I'll make a few remarks and then read it again.
Just as death and life cannot be shared in at the same time, so also is it an impossibility for charity to exist in anyone along with money. For charity not only gets rid of money, but even of this present life itself.
Death and life, money and charity, and this present life and the presence of the kingdom. Death, in the biblical tradition, we thought about this a little bit yesterday together. Death in the biblical tradition and the spiritual life is that spiritual condition which deprives one of the unfolding of what is given. It is to presume something else is needed. The death entered life, as we read in Genesis 3. Long before the mortal coil of Adam and Eve entered the eternal. It enters when the human nature forgets it is the image of God and thinks it needs to be something. It is to presume something else is needed. Everything changes when need arises. One loses the unfolding communion with others, with creation, and with God. Walking in the cool of the midday turns to hiding in shame. Death and dying are not the same in the spiritual life. Dying is holy. Money, for Evagrius and the monastic tradition, is a metaphor for eschewing all property, all sense of ownership, for the sake of security and independence. disposition of charity, loving kindness, is one of acceptance and attentiveness to the needs of others. And it's coterminous with one's being in relationship to others. It is the acceptance of our being in communion as elemental, the ground of our life together, and the disposition through which we are able to respond to others. Being poor in spirit, that first of the Beatitudes that sounded so curious when I first heard it as a child. Being poor in spirit is the ground of our response ability, our ability to respond. When we are not poor in spirit, when we have things to offer, we are no longer responding to what is before us. Property turns into transaction. Transaction deforms presence. This present life itself, as Evagrius phrases it, we need to be careful with this term and what worldly means in the biblical revelation. When one's mind is captured by the temporal aspects of what is unfolding, it's not that they're wrong. It's when our mind is captured by them. When one is fixated on the incidents of the moment, this present life, one is no longer oriented towards what is unfolding in the mystery of God's providence. This word providence is also sometimes problematic. So often people think it means God has arranged things. But the word provision, pro is toward vision. And vision isn't an apparition. It is seeing what is. When we are not in that disposition, we are projecting, seeing what we wish to see. Joseph in Egypt, who I love so much, is the only tzaddik, that's a Hebrew term for righteous one, the only tzaddik in the narratives of the patriarchs, because he pulled life from death, both as one sold into prison and as one before Pharaoh and in the meeting with his brothers. The present life was not his concern. Being thrown in the pit by his brothers, being in Potiphar's prison, being in Pharaoh's prison. The unfolding of the kingdom, of the new relationship in which life may be nurtured, was what he embraced. Provision, provide. It's an attentiveness to what's unfolding. Chapter 18.
Just as death and life
Thank you. I'm sorry. Pardon me.
cannot be shared in at the same time, So also it is an impossibility for charity to exist in anyone along with money. For charity not only gets rid of money, but even of this present life itself.
When we are in the disposition of loving kindness, we possess nothing. We're empty-handed. As Shakespeare says in King Lear, like Cordelia, bearing nothing. Chapter 19. Lorraine, are you able to read this for us? And just a
Yes,
couple
absolutely.
reflections, and then I'll read it again. Thank
Okay.
you.
Chapter 19. The man who flees from all worldly pleasures is an impregnable tower before the assaults of the demon of sadness. For sadness is a deprivation of sensible pleasure, whether actually present or only hoped for. And so if we continue to cherish if we continue to cherish some affection for anything in this world, it is impossible to repel this enemy, for he lays his snares and produces sadness precisely where he sees we are particularly inclined.
Fleeing from worldly pleasures is setting nostalgia aside. Nostalgia is the fruit of a disordered memory, the child of a desire unfulfilled, turning into an appetite. For Evagrius, as mentioned, ascesis has a child who is called agape. So it is that nostalgia has a child that is called sadness. If we continue to nurture nostalgia, worldly pleasure, we continue to live for and we orient ourselves toward what is not present. The power of this demon is enormous and cunning. Sadness becomes ubiquitous, and our capacity to attend to what is unfolding and the joy of participating in life shrinks. The man who flees is an impregnable tower. To no longer be under siege of nostalgia, to no longer be colonized by its generative power, its seed of disappointment and longing, is the recovery of chastity, attentiveness to the margins of one's being, the grace of acceptance as the fruit of confession opens the way to liberty from this demon. Do you read it again for us, Lorraine?
Absolutely. The man who flees from all worldly pleasures is an impregnable tower before the assaults of the demon of sadness. For sadness is a deprivation of sensible pleasure, whether actually present or only hoped for. And so if we continue to cherish some affection for anything in this world, that is impossible to repel this enemy, for he lays his snares and produces sadness, precisely where he sees we are particularly inclined.
So if we continue to cherish some affection for anything in this world. Affection for the temporal circumstance as we understand it, which is different than for what is unfolding. It is impossible to repel this enemy. Chapter 20. Robert, would you read chapter 20?
Chapter 20. Both anger and hatred increase anger, but almsgiving and meekness diminish it even when it is present.
Evagrius is not utopian in his thinking, not always thinking about ultimates, but rather he's grounded in the experience of monks, some of whom are simple but good-hearted. And in this chapter, we see his simple pastoral recommendation that to push back against anger and hatred, to begin to have them diminish in the mind, a simple act of almsgiving opens the door to a disposition of meekness, and thus a fast from anger and hatred may begin. Almsgiving, done with pity, but as a response in recognition of the image of God in another, may awaken one's own dependence on God, and thus show forth the demonic aspect of anger and hatred. It's odd to me, I experience this, how a touch of anger may arise when one is confronted with a beggar. Again, Robert?
Both anger and hatred increase anger, but almsgiving and meekness diminish it even when it is present.
Yeah. Chapter 21. Andrew, would you read this?
Let not the sun go down upon our anger, lest by night the demons come upon us to strike fear in our souls and render our spirits more cowardly for the fight on the morrow. For images of a frightful kind usually arise from anger's disturbing influence. Indeed, there is nothing more disposed to render the spirit inclined to desertion than troubled irascibility.
In Evagrius and much of the desert literature on the spiritual life, there is little distinction made between what is actually done in one's waking hours and what invades one's dreams. All is a result of the disposition of the soul, its disorder being a prism through which we see and react to all life. When anger arises, it is carried into the night and shapes how we react in the morning when faced with the person or some occasion that causes us to recall it. The tragedy is how it despoils our next encounter, how it seeds further alienation. And of course, it does that because we become alienated from ourselves in the very act. We are unable to respond in the spirit of affection, even to the point of no longer desiring communion. Think of that. No longer desiring communion with another human being. And since monasteries are kind of hothouses, this becomes something that becomes very vivid very quickly. Evagrius advises to not let the sun go down upon your anger, for it colors what is to come in your dreams and when you wake. Do you read it again, Robert?
Let not the sun go down upon our anger, lest by night the demons come upon us to strike fear in our souls and render our spirits more cowardly for the fight on the morrow. For images of a frightful kind usually arise from anger's disturbing influence. Indeed, there is nothing more disposed to render the spirit inclined to desertion than troubled irascibility.
In a monastery, this is vivid because if anger arises and the one that a monk is angry at decides they no longer can stay there and must go, it's vivid to the whole community that something is wrong. In my life, this, and I suppose for most of us, when this has occurred, it has meant that people just kind of slowly withdraw, or that you have to find another person for the committee. Chapter 22. Todd, would you read chapter 22?
When under some provocation or other, the irascible part of our soul is stirred up, it is just at that moment that the demons suggest to us the advantages of solitude, so as to have us deliver ourselves from the disturbance rather than clear up the basic causes of the sadness. When it is our lust that flames up, they cause us to seek out once again the friendly company of men and call us callous and uncivil in the hope that while we feel the desire for bodies, we might happen upon them. But give no confidence to such promptings. On the contrary, follow the opposite course.
The irascible part of the soul. There are these three faculties, three dimensions of the soul. This is the incentive or spiritual power, the themos, where that is located. It's the energy, the zeal, and courage. When it's properly ordered, is used to struggle against the logismoi, the evil thought, and to passionately pursue virtue and the love of God. This is the spirited faculty of our human nature. The use of isolation as if it was solitude is a defense mechanism. A ubiquitous form, seems to me, others here know this much better than I, although I've done it plenty, a ubiquitous form of passive-aggressive reaction, I think, for many. How often do men withdraw from their loved ones when faced with anger, and then lock in to a kind of austere sadness, making their loved one think it was all their fault. Or alternatively, if lust flames up, the desire for some distracting engagement, the seeking out of others, is in service to covering up our struggle. What is sought is not relationship, but distraction. What is sought is diversion away from the cause of the sadness. We use even the appetite for friendship to avoid the cause of our sadness. Two moves of the soul at the invitation of the demon here. The first, inversion. The second, diversion. The first, inversion. The second, diversion. Would you read it again, Todd?
When under some provocation or other, the irascible part of our soul is stirred up, it is just at that moment that the demons suggest to us the advantages of solitude, so as to have us deliver ourselves from the disturbance rather than clear up the basic causes of the sadness. When it is our lust that flames up, they cause us to seek out once again the friendly company of men and call us callous and uncivil in the hope that while we feel the desire for bodies, we might happen upon them. But give no confidence to such promptings. On the contrary, follow the opposite course.
Chapter 23. Sylvie, could you read it for us?
Yes, 1 second. Do not give yourself over to your angry thoughts, so as to fight in your mind with the one who has vexed you, nor again to thoughts of fornication, imagining the pleasure vividly. The one darkens the soul, the other invites to the burning of passion. Both cause your mind to be defiled, and while you indulge these fancies at the time of prayer, and thus do not offer pure prayer to God, the demon of acedia falls upon you without delay. He falls above all upon souls in this state, and dog-like snatches away the soul as if it were a fawn.
The movements of the monastic liturgical life, prayer and fasting, are for the sake of concentration, to bring us back into the quiet of the heart. Concentration. That word in its elements speaks of with, together, jointly, speaks of convene, consensus, concentration. And thus concentration is the opposite of self-centered. Note the link Evagrius makes when the passion of anger takes hold. Either the preoccupation of the mind, anger toward another, which darkens the soul, or thoughts of fornication, a burning passion as distraction. Inversion or diversion. both as fantasies that can be, Evagrius says, indulged, can arise and be indulged at the time of prayer. If they are indulged, they lead to acedia that snatches away the soul. It is in a way to lose your mind. Would you read it again, Sylvie?
Do not give yourself over to your angry thoughts, so as to fight in your mind with the one who has vexed you, nor again to thoughts of fornication, imagining the pleasure vividly. The one darkens the soul, the other invites to the burning of passion. Both cause your mind to be defiled, and while you indulge these fancies at the time of prayer, and thus do not offer pure prayer to God, the demon of acedia falls upon you without delay. He falls above all upon souls in that state, and dog-like snatches away the soul as if it were a thong.
Niels, would you read chapter 24?
Certainly. Can you hear me?
Yes, nicely.
Okay. Anger is given to us that we might fight against the demons and strive against every pleasure. Now it happens that the angels suggest spiritual pleasure to us and the beatitude that is consequent upon it, so as to encourage us to turn our anger against the demons. But these, for their part, draw our anger to worldly desires and constrain us, contrary to our nature, to fight against our fellow men, to the end that, blinded in mind and falling away from knowledge, our spirit should become a traitor to virtue.
Evagrius suggests that anger is given us. This is that aspect of the soul to strive against every pleasure. Pleasures in this sense are hatred and fornication. They're appetites born of our disordered soul. Spiritual pleasures are natural to the soul, given by God, a movement toward communion and joy. The beatitude referred to is the English word meek, derived from the Greek word parous, which signifies gentle, meek, or humble. In ancient Greek, parous was used often to describe a broken-in or a trained war horse, powerful, strong animals that were under control and obedient to their rider. It implies strength under control rather than weakness. And in Hebrew, it is to become God-dependent. For Evagrius, as we so often see, the irascible part of the soul, its incentive and spiritual power, is a good. Our spiritedness, our heart, our vital forces, indeed, the human capacity for feeling, has its proper purpose when used to struggle against the adversary. When it is repurposed, deformed, it turns outward towards others, away from the knowledge, the love of God, and becomes, in this remarkable phrase of his, a traitor to virtue, a traitor to excellence, a traitor to what is. It blinds the depth of the soul, the mind, the nous, and works against our nature. Would you read it again for us?
Certainly. Anger is given to us so that we might fight against the demons and strive against every pleasure. Now it happens that the angels suggest spiritual pleasure to us and the beatitude that is consequent on it, so as to encourage us to turn our anger against the demons. But these, for their part, draw our anger to worldly desires and constrain us, contrary to our nature, to fight against our fellow men, to the end that, blinded in mind and falling away from knowledge, our spirit should become a traitor to virtue.
Chapter 25. Chris, would you read chapter 25 for us?
Sure. Be very attentive, lest ever you cause some brother to become a fugitive through your anger. For if this should happen your whole life long, you will yourself not be able to flee from the demon of sadness. At the time of prayer, this will be a constant stumbling block to you.
Being angry with another person may be a kind of act of withdrawal. It often means they withdraw and shun our presence. When the demon of sadness arises, and no more so, that when we seek to enter into quiet attentiveness and concentration, to pray. Odd, huh? But I know this inside out, alas. Whatever has prompted our anger is inappropriate if it is spoken when it cannot be heard. Whatever has prompted our anger is inappropriate if it is spoken when it cannot be heard, when it does not lead to a deeper communion. In such circumstances, it is a word bearing false witness. All true words are words that can be received, words that deepen and heal. Anger also may be a sin against the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." Some forms of anger are a manifestation of the destruction of the image of the one is angry towards. Thus, we know and see the image of God. They are. Would you read it again for us?
Mhm. Be very attentive, lest ever you cause some brother to become a fugitive through your anger. For if this should happen your whole life long, you will yourself not be able to flee from the demon of sadness. At the time of prayer, this will be a constant stumbling block to you.
Chapter 26. Tara, would you read chapter 26 for us?
Sure.
A gift snuffs out the fire of resentment, as Jacob well knew, for he flattered Esau with gifts when he went out to meet him with 400 men. But as for ourselves, who are poor men, we must supply for our lack of gifts by the table we lay.
It's short, referring to one of those marvelous biblical narratives in Genesis 32-33. He's invoking that really haunting and moving story about the brothers, about what it means to receive the blessing. This passage gives an account of the transformation of anger and vengeance resulting from doing wrongs to a brother, the offering of a gift and the amelioration of fear, and how all things are made new and they walk together. I want to read some from Genesis 23 because it's such an amazing passage. And I think it's at the heart of all this. So note while I read from it the use of the word face, countenance, seeing the other. It appears again and again. And in some sense, the image is restored. I'm going to read from the superb translation of Rabbi Everett Fox, the volume that is published under the title The Five Books of Moses. He's an American Jewish rabbi and scholar, biblical scholar, and he translates the Hebrew Bible into English, and he does it holding hands with Martin Buber, or at least I think he's holding hands with Martin Buber. Martin Buber, who talked so much about the Bible as a dialogue, an encounter addressing us. So listen, I'll read Genesis 32:10-29. Then Jacob said, Father of my God, Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Adonai, who said to me, return to your land, to your kindred, and I will deal well with you. Too small am I for all the faithfulness and trust that you have shown your servant. For with only my rod did I cross the Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Pray, save me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I am in fear of him, lest he come and strike me down, mothers and children alike. But you have said, I will deal well with you. I will make your seed like the sand of the sea, which is too much to count. Spending the night there, that night, he took a gift from what was at hand for Esau, his brother. She-goats, 200, and kids, 20, ewes, 200, and rams, 20. He handed them over to his servants, herd by herd, separately, and said to his servants, cross ahead of me, and leave room between herd and herd. He charged the first group, saying, when Esau, my brother, meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And to whom do these ahead of you belong? Then say, to your servant, to Jacob. It is a gift sent to my Lord, to Esau. And here he himself is also behind us. For he said to himself, I will wipe the anger from his face with the gift that goes ahead of my face. Afterwards, when I see his face, perhaps he will lift up his face. Be gracious unto me. The gift crosses over ahead of his face. But he spent the night, on that night, in the camp. He rose during the night, took his 2 wives, his 2 maidens, and his 11 children to cross the Yabok crossing. Yabok in Hebrew means a kind of traditional boundary. He took them and brought them across the river. He brought across what belonged to him, and Jacob was left alone. Jacob was left alone. Now a man wrestles with him until the coming up of dawn. Note that. A man wrestles with him until the coming up of dawn. When he saw that he could not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. The socket of Jacob's thigh had been dislocated as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for dawn has come up. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. He said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then he said, not as Jacob. The name in Hebrew means heel sneak. Shall your name be henceforth uttered, but rather as Israel, God fighter. The whole of chapter 32 and 33 unfold a remarkable narrative of how grace arises where there's been enmity, and the nature of wrestling with known acts and deep inner struggles. How restoration unfolds through the act of gift, the gift of understanding, perhaps first the gift of recognition, what you've done, the gift of understanding, the gift of fear, of opening to the face of the one who was harmed, the gift of seeing the face of the other when previously all he saw was his ruddy skin and his garments of skin. There is echoes of paradise in this, of the Garden of Eden in this. Would you read it again for us, Tara?
Sure.
And slowly, just slowly.
A gift snuffs out the fire of resentment, as Jacob well knew, for he flattered Esau with gifts when he went out to meet him with 400 men. But as for ourselves, who are poor men, we must supply for our lack of gifts by the table we lay.
Thank you. Chapter 27. Jeremy, would you read this for us?
Gladly. When we meet with the demon of ascetia, then is the time with tears to divide our soul in two. One part is to encourage, the other is to be encouraged. Thus we are to sow seeds of a firm hope in ourselves while we sing with the holy David. Why are you filled with sadness, my soul? Why are you distraught? Trust in God, for I shall give praise to him. He it is who saves me, the light of my eyes and my God.
Akidia. The root word means care, concern, or grief. But of course, it's the lack of that, the lack of care, the lack of concern, the lack of grief. Or even more precisely, it is normally in Latin translated as sloth, which I don't think carries much of the weight of this. It's really a condition where you are unable to care. You have an inability. So distraction becomes everything. It's called the noonday demon. It's a deep, I think some of you may have thoughts on this. I'd love to hear. It is a deep form of depression. The recognition of this demon is hard won. It's hard won because one is constantly paying attention to other things which formally are good concerns. Since it manifests in moving quickly from one presumed concern to another, it's a cycle of distraction and a breaking of the disposition towards presence. Presumed concern for others dominates the mind. It's a distraction, alas, so one can ignore one's own grief. As Evagrius notes, an awakening to one's own condition is required. Evagrius calls for a time for tears. Tears are a gift of grace. Does the cycle of distraction and its accompanying sadness have to deepen before tears or recognition can arise? Evagrius calls for attention to the Psalms prayed daily in the office and the liturgies of the monastic life, to hear David's voice as one's own voice, a voice of distress, is offered in every liturgy of the Church. This is a deep matter. Would you read it again for us, Jeremy?
When we meet with the demon of Acedia, then is the time with tears to divide our soul into two. One part is to encourage, the other is to be encouraged. Thus we are to sow seeds of a firm hope in ourselves while we sing with the holy David, why are you filled with sadness, my soul? Why are you distraught? Trust in God, for I shall give praise to him. He it is who saves me, the light of my eyes and my God.
Chapter 28. Are you free to read, Jacqueline?
Yes, I am.
Do you read chapter 28?
The time of temptation is not the time to leave one's cell, devising plausible pretexts. Rather, stand there firmly and be patient. Bravely take all that the demon brings upon you, but above all, face up to the demon of ascetia, who is the most grievous of all, and who, on this account, will effect the greatest purification of soul. Indeed, to flee and to shun such conflicts schools the spirit in awkwardness, cowardice, and fear.
Temptation is a revelation, the inner movement of the heart, unveiling a disease. It's not to be ignored, and it's not to be reacted to. Rather, the response is one of attention, precisely because it is cunning, suggesting what appears to be a virtuous intent to visit or see others, to care about one's neighbor, or to seek another spiritual experience, another master, another monastery. It's a movement of the appetite, of acedia. Since this demon eschews presence above all else, only being present to it in stillness may begin the movement out of its dominance. Would you read it again for us?
The time of temptation is not the time to leave one's cell, devising plausible pretexts. Rather, stand there firmly and be patient. Bravely take all that the demon brings upon you, but above all, face up to the demon of acedia, who is the most grievous of all, and who, on this account, will effect the greatest purification of soul. Indeed, to flee and to shun such conflicts schools the spirit in awkwardness, cowardice, and fear.
Chapter 29. Andrew, would you read this for us?
Indeed. Chapter 29. Yeah. Our holy and most ascetic master Macarius the Great stated that the monk should always live as if he were to die on the morrow, but at the same time that he should treat his body as if he were to live on with it for many years to come. For, he said, by the first attitude, he will be able to cut off every thought that comes from acedia, and thus become more fervent in his monastic practices. By the second device, he will preserve his body in good health and maintain its continence intact.
There is something about dying that focuses the mind and attitude. Secondary matters depart, and gratitude for what is at hand falls into place, as well as a concern for those one's death will leave behind. Always live as if you were to die on the morrow. Perhaps the condition of acedia is also one in which the normal sense of finitude and presence is replaced with one of importance and ministry outward, a misdirected concern, seeing oneself as needed by others. And in this way, avoiding one's own inner suffering, or seeing oneself as being given a mission by God. And avoiding one's inner suffering. Monastic practice, prayer and fasting, and the rhythms of the liturgical life are all given to us to deepen our capacity for attention, for watchfulness, nepsis, and thus our presence in thanksgiving to the reality that is unfolding now. Continence, self-restraint of bodily desires. In the monastic tradition, much is made of this, usually as a matter of bodily appetite. But it also, and primarily, it seems to me, is a spiritual matter, attending to our dispositions toward others. And in that sense, it's a form of spiritual chastity. Would you read it again, Andrew? Mm-hmm.
Our holy and most ascetic master stated that the monk should always live as if he were to die on the morrow, but at the same time that he should treat his body as if he were to live on with it for many years to come. For, he said, by the first attitude, he will be able to cut off every thought that comes from acedia, and thus become more fervent in his monastic practices. By the second device, he will preserve his body in good health and maintain its continence intact.
It is important to note how he speaks here of living with death ever before your eyes and caring for your precious body. We are incarnate. It counts. Chapter 30. Daniel, would you read chapter 30 for us?
It is only with considerable difficulty that one can escape thought of vainglory. For what you do to destroy it becomes the principle of some other form of vainglory. Now the demons do not oppose every good thought of ours, and vices which we have also opposed some of them.
The struggle against egotism, self-regard, is easily inverted in its purpose and in its telos. Its disciplines cunningly invert and become a form of spiritual pride. The demon of vainglory highlights every good thought of ours, causing one to focus on it, to cultivate the outward practice of its discipline, as if the discipline was its purpose. Then turned inward. Its posture is one of self-preoccupation and self-aggrandizement. Vainglory is the opposite of the disposition toward the glory of God, manifest in all things, striving for the perfection of one's own virtue, as if our being is enclosed in identity, cutting off our being, unfolding in communion, dependent, and a matter of responding to others. Would you read it again?
It is only with considerable difficulty that one can escape the thought of vainglory. For what you do to destroy it becomes the principle of some other form of vain glory. Now the demons do not oppose every good thought of ours. The vices which we have also oppose some of them.
Would you also read the next one, Daniel, 31?
I have observed the demon of vainglory being chased by nearly all the other demons. And when his pursuers fell, shamelessly he drew near and unfolded a long list of his virtues.
Such an extraordinary image, huh? The principalities and powers battle with each other. Each seeks hegemony, its own triumph, dragooning the person into its particular precinct. When one engages seriously against a particular demon, a particular appetite, disciplining one's mind in this spiritual struggle, when we begin to vanquish their dominance, Evagrius notes that in a cunning way, what you do to destroy it turns inward, highlighting your spiritual progress and achievement in pushing back this particular appetite. The danger of vainglory is seeded precisely by highlighting the action toward purification. Reorientation towards purity coddles the soul's self-regard. That is how vainglory uses the good thoughts of ours and inclines us toward the long list of our virtues. Read it again, Daniel.
I have observed the demon of vainglory being chased by nearly all the other demons. And when his pursuers fell, shamelessly he drew near and unfolded a long list of his virtues.
Chapter 32. Ted, would you read chapter 32?
When a man has once attained to contemplative knowledge and the delight that derives from it, he will no longer yield himself up to the demon of vainglory. Though the demon offer all the delights of the world to him. For what, may I ask, could surpass spiritual contemplation? Thus it is that we go on eagerly working at the ascetical life, so long as we have not tasted this knowledge, proving to God that we do everything for the sole aim of attaining it.
What does Evagrius mean by contemplative knowledge? And I can ask the other question, what does he mean by the active life? I mean, it's interesting. We often think of action and contemplation as two different faces or dimensions of life. And of course, the very title of this work, Praktikos, practice, is about the active life. But active in what? Active how? Active towards what? Contemplative. Contemplating what? How does that work? So what does Evagrius mean by contemplative knowledge? Is it knowing something? Or is it a disposition towards all things, in which all becomes a thou and nothing is an it? Knowledge, as taught to us in the Hebrew Bible, is always and only through the disposition of loving kindness. We only know in love. And contemplative knowledge is dwelling in God's love manifest in all creation. So contemplative knowledge is a disposition toward what is greeting us in life. It arises as grace in those who are poor in spirit, pure in heart. It is the disposition we glimpse in the garden, walking with God in the cool of the afternoon, in the shade of the tree of life. It is being in communion, a communion given when and only when what we think we have to offer has faded and simple presence arises. Would you read it again, Ted?
When a man has once attained to contemplative knowledge and the delight that derives from it, he will no longer yield himself up to the demon of vainglory, though the demon offer all the delights of the world to him. For what, may I ask, could surpass spiritual contemplation? Thus it is, we go on eagerly working at the ascetical life, so long as we have not tasted this knowledge, proving to God that we do everything for the sole aim of attaining it.
Thank you. I think it would be good to take some time to think together, talk together here. We can continue our reading tomorrow. So are there things you would like to bring to the table, to ponder, to think about again, to wonder about, to regard? And that includes what might be surprising, what might be, even in some deep sense, curious.
David, and this is more of a personal commentary on the gift that was given in Genesis 30 or in Genesis 32 and 33. We lived in the South Pacific for 3 years, and I was teaching at a seminary and was talking about reconciliation, how that's embodied. And some of the early missionaries, sort of the missionary culture, had downplayed the necessity of gift giving when it comes to restoration and reconciliation, is that your word should be enough. I forgive you, vice versa. And that was deeply problematic to South Pacific tribal culture, that forgiveness, restitution had to be embodied in a gift, and it was not transactional. It was the gift. Not only do I come bearing the gift bears me. And so it's very much, I mean, the whole culture is very Hebraic in its understanding of those things. But it was just this just highlighted how relevant that was and is anyway. That's it.
That's interesting, huh? How we steal birthrights.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of it,
Mm-hmm.
that narrative of Jacob and Esau before Isaac's blind. He's going for the final blessing before Isaac departs this world. And it's the blessing that in the structure of the culture is given to the eldest son. That's interesting. We steal, alas, we steal birthrights in many ways.
Oh, yeah.
And across cultures.
Yeah.
But then we think of how Jacob himself, after this wrestling match with the man, it says, we always think of it as an angel. Yeah, it's a messenger, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And at least in part, it's a messenger from his own conscious.
Mm-hmm.
It's a part of himself
Mm-hmm.
that was at work there. And Jacob himself ends up in a similar position because what it meant to be his firstborn, Joseph, these are trickster stories in some ways, was born to the second one because he was tricked with the first one. And then he, that beloved boy, the source of jealousy, the one with the many-colored coat, thrown in a pit by his brothers, sold to a caravan, sold into slavery in prison, through prisons coming before Pharaoh and reading Pharaoh's dream, pulling life from death. And then the son's coming. Then the tribe, suffering from famine, goes to the place where Jacob said you should never go, the land of the dead, the land with this inflated cult of the dead. That will later imprison, enslave the whole of the people. And Joseph says, well, why don't you bring your father? And then that haunting meeting where he brings to his father his two sons, born of an Egyptian woman. I mean, it's so amazing. This Joseph is the Zadok, the only one called a Zadok among all the patriarchal narratives. He has sons who are not Jews. And we have that image of him bringing his sons to his father for the blessing. It's a remarkable set of images. So gift. I mean, we see in this, and it can be read in one way. Evagrius says to us, that the only gift you have as a monk is your presence, because you don't have anything else. The only gift you have is your presence, because you possess nothing else. So why I wanted to read part of that narrative was to just place before us again this, the way this text, I mean, this happens a number of times in the scripture, but I don't think any way more fully than here, where the face, seeing the image of God incarnate, is the source of restoration, return, redemption, salvation, healing. It is easy, and lots of this happens in human cultures, to confuse reconciliation with payment. But the opposite problem is in what you were talking about, which is confusing confession, speaking the words, I'm sorry, with confession, and assuming that if you speak the words, you get the result. Well, that's not a disposition of communion. That's a presumption of manipulation. Yeah, interesting.
And the gift was always in the context of a meal.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it didn't exist on its own. There was always eating and drinking with it. Yeah.
Others, Ted?
Just to play on that, because what's going on in my mind is in 2 Corinthians 5, the ministry message of reconciliation. And it's an intrigue. It's one of my favorite Greek words, katalasso, which means exchange. And it's a fascinating thing, but that's very different than transaction. And so this conversation is fascinating to me. And depending on how we see the other, if we see the other in Buber's kind of language as the it, then there's transaction. If we see the other as thou, then it's exchange. Something happens. Something is reconciled in that exchange. Something new is born. And depending on how we see the other. And I love that, pointing out the face in Genesis 32. So that's so intriguing to me, and I'm moved to pay attention to. Am I seeking a transaction? And like you said, the presumption of the "I forgive you" after the "I am sorry" is that's a transactional mindset as opposed to exchange. And I'm curious now to dig in further into this exchange.
I wonder if that's the word in Greek. I mean, it would be interesting for you to check it, but you could do that later on.
Which word in Greek?
Is it exchange? Is it exchange, or is it?
Oh yeah. That's
is it transfiguration?
You're probably right there. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is,
The first definition is
does the
exchange.
figure,
Yeah.
does the figure of both shift?
Yeah. Especially
Are they made new?
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. That's really good. I'm glad you pointed out that Genesis 32. It's incredible.
I was just impressed by Evagrius and, you know, his ancient insight that is directly relevant to modern psychology and the therapy world in chapter 27 when he's talking about time with tears to divide the soul. One part is to encourage, the other is to be encouraged. Why are you feel the saddest, my soul? And the idea of parts or parts work or work with different parts of the self is quite old in psychology, but a newer model called internal family systems is pretty hot right now. But the same principle of transforming the inner dialogue, um, and almost instead of your emotions or these parts taking over, you kind of become this parental part toward your emotions or toward the parts of self. So instead of because these emotions are these parts, the more they get elevated, the more they narrow our perspective. The more we get angry, the more we get consumed by sadness or grief, our vision narrows to be very small. And so, here it's like you are encouraging, you are soothing the distressed child in you, or the distressed kind of emotion that has a very narrow focus. Encouragement itself is a broadening of someone's perspective. You're not seeing the whole picture. And I think all the passions is about like a lack of vision, a lack of seeing reality, or a lack of contact with reality. Like if your anger is proportional to the situation, or your anxiety, like if you don't have enough anxiety, you're not going to study for the test. If you have too much anxiety, you're going to be paralyzed. Just the right amount will help you prepare. And so, it's kind of this learning how to let, instead of that self-critical voice just shaming you all the time, that self-critical voice is trying to warn you of a danger. It wants you to succeed. It's like that. Instead of that highly critical coach or teacher, it's that teacher or coach that is challenging you, but also believes in you and encourages you instead of just shaming you all the time and making you feel worse about yourself. So I appreciate Evagrius is like, yes, these are internal wars we have, and we have to learn how to, maybe master isn't the right word, but like to parent, basically, you know?
Loving kindness.
Yeah.
That's what agape is, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Loving kindness. And for him, he saw this in Macarius the Great. He saw it in his spiritual teachers. And he saw them as dwelling in God's grace. Because that, of course, is why we say with the words of Jesus Christ, when you pray, pray, our Father. That's an amazing invocation in which we recognize that ultimately that parent, as you describe it, with that psychological system and that moment of seeking in your work, caring for the soul of others, to gesture towards that is at the very heart of this, which is contemplation in its ultimate telos, is drawing near to the glory of God. Because that's where freedom and liberty is. The freedom and liberty of having those inner voices no longer dominate, but come home and be what their real purpose is. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. Others?
Daniel, Chris?
I found myself thinking about solitude and community, and when we were reading chapter 29, I found myself thinking back to chapter 22 and feeling this kind of conundrum where um, when I'm irascible towards others, then I want to flee community and go into solitude. And when I'm irascible with myself, I want to flee myself and go into community.
Yeah. Nicely said. Although I can't imagine you ever being irascible, but
Ask Ted.
I I certainly know that in myself. So yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, all of these chapters are talking to each other. So that's lovely. Yeah. Niels, is there anything you'd like to put before us?
No, I think Daniel had something from the last time he wanted to bring forward. So,
Yeah.
and we're coming up against time.
Thank
So
you.
I'll
Yeah.
save my thoughts for later.
I had moved my brain, but when the sort of the closing question yesterday of were we seeing, discerning succession or progression or some sort of movement in the vices, I had been thinking about that, and so when I went back and I read it, I basically realized I'd skipped over the first line of chapter 6, which says there are 8 general and basic categories of thoughts, in which are included every thought. And
Mm-hmm.
I had first read that as him saying you can categorize all of your thoughts into one of these 8. But as I sat with it longer, I wondered if he was saying something a little more macro or meta, like was he suggesting to us that they're all the same? And I wondered if you had a comment on that or a thought on what he's actually saying in that. What does he mean included in every thought?
Chapter 6?
Yeah, it's just that first line.
Yes. So let me read it again. There are 8 general and basic categories of thought in which are included every thought. First is gluttony, impurity, avarice, sadness, anger, acedia, vainglory, and pride. It is not in our power to determine whether we are disturbed by these thoughts, but it is up to us to decide if they are to linger within us or not, and whether or not they are to stir up passions. He isn't here trying to give us some kind of theoretical system. He's simply trying to diagnose how dis-ease arises. and then to point out that it arises from a God-given gift, these three dimensions of the soul. It is God-given. These are profoundly good. And the dance of our passions and the way those passions have spun out into the world and become demons, the dance of that leads to them being disordered. And so the healing of it is always restoration. Or to use the lovely phrase that for many years I wouldn't use because I thought it had been colonized, but I'm trying to redeem it. The beautiful phrase from the gospel, to be born again. To be born again. To have your nature restored. Why? So you can live in the joy of God's world and experience that communion with the life of the world, with others, with God, which is your personhood. We are made for communion. We're not made for the sea of alienation. And Evagrius, this whole tradition is saying, God is still wooing us to that through others and through our own revelations. The first of which is the mystery of our own suffering.
Thank you.
Let's pause here.